The conspiracy and background surrounding Black Bart. Before he became one of the most elusive outlaws in American history, Charles E. Bowles lived a life that seemed ordinary, like thousands of men in the 19th century America. He answered the call to serve during the Civil War. Historical records indicate that he enlisted in the 116th Illinois Infantry in 1862, eventually rising to the rank of first sergeant. He fought in some of the war's most difficult campaigns, including the Siege of Vicksburg, where he was wounded, and later participated in General William T. Sherman's famous March to the Sea. These experiences exposed him to years of hardship, violence, and uncertainty that would forever shape his world view. When the war ended, Bowles returned home, like many veterans who hoped to build a prosperous future. Instead, he encountered financial instability and the harsh realities of a frontier life. The promises of wealth that had drawn so many Americans westward often resulted in disappointment. Failed mining ventures, economic struggles, and personal setbacks became common experiences for former soldiers attempting to rebuild their lives. Some historians have suggested that these frustrations may have contributed to Bowles' eventual transformation into Black Bart, although no definitive evidence exists to prove a direct connection. The contrast between the disciplined soldier and the notorious outlaw creates one of the most fascinating aspects about Black Bart's story. Was he a man hardened by war, a victim of circumstance? Or was his criminal career the result of choices entirely unrelated to his military service? More than a century later, historians continue to debate the role that his wartime experiences may have played into shaping the man he would become. Unlike the violent gunfighters who dominated dime novels and newspaper headlines, Black Bart developed a reputation unlike any other outlaw of the American West. Witnesses consistently described him as polite, calm, and surprisingly respectful. He rarely raised his voice, avoided profanity, and often treated stagecoach drivers with a degree of courtesy that seemed entirely out of place during a robbery. This unusual behavior helped create the image of the gentleman bandit. His robberies relied less on violence and more on psychology. Armed with a shotgun and hidden behind a flour sack mask, Black Bart frequently convinced stagecoach drivers that they were surrounded by armed accomplices. In reality, the supposed gang members were often nothing more than carefully arranged sticks positioned to resemble rifle barrels. By creating the illusion of overwhelming force, he was able to complete his robberies without firing a shot. Investigators later noted that he reportedly never discharged his weapon during any of his known crimes. This raises an intriguing question. Was Black Bart simply a criminal who preferred efficiency over violence? Or was he deliberately crafting a public image? His behavior suggests a man who understood the power of reputation. Fear and mystery became his greatest weapons. Long before modern media manipulation, Black Bart may have understood that legends could be just as powerful as guns. One of the most enduring aspects of Black Bart's legend involves the poems he supposedly left behind after his robberies. Popular culture often portrays him as a prolific outlaw poet who taunted authorities through verse after every crime. The reality, however, appears to be far more limited. Historical records confirm only two authenticated poems connected to Black Bart. Despite this small number, those poems generated enormous attention and helped transform him into a folk hero. The poems fascinated newspapers throughout California because they challenged public expectations. outlaws were expected to be rough, uneducated criminals. Black Bart instead appeared witty, literate, and strangely self-aware. The contrast between his crimes and his poetry created a compelling narrative that journalists eagerly promoted. In many ways, the newspapers helped create the Black Bart legend by emphasizing the unusual details that separated him from other criminals. The public no longer saw merely a robber. They saw a character, a mystery, a poet hiding behind a mask. The poems became a symbol of sophistication and rebellion, elevating Black Bart from a regional crime to one of the most recognizable outlaws of the Old West. Even today, many people know him primarily because of those verses, rather than the crimes themselves. One of the most persistent conspiracy theories surrounding Black Bart suggests that his robberies were motivated by more than just financial gain. Supporters of this theory point to a surviving letter in which Charles Bowles, aka Black Bart, described a negative encounter with agents of Wells Fargo during his years as a prospector. According to the letter, the experience left him deeply resentful and determined to seek revenge against the company. If this theory were to be correct, Black Bart's robberies may have represented a personal campaign against one of the most powerful corporations in the American West. The fact that he almost exclusively targeted Wells Fargo stages has fueled speculation that he viewed the company as a symbol of the economic forces that had failed him. Rather than simply stealing money, he may have been trying to embarrass and undermine the organization itself. While there remains to be no evidence, historians caution that a single grievance does not necessarily explain years of criminal activity. This revenge theory remains compelling, but ultimately rests on circumstantial evidence and interpretation. Nevertheless, it continues to attract attention because it transforms Black Bart's crimes into something larger than ordinary robbery, a personal war against a corporate giant as a lone man. The mystery surrounding Black Bart deepened after his disappearance. In November 1888, months after he vanished from the historical record, another Wells Fargo stagecoach was robbed by a masked bandit. The robber left behind a poem reminiscent of Black Bart's famous verses, immediately sparking rumors that the legendary outlaw had returned. Detective James Hume, the man largely responsible for Black Bart's capture, examined the poem carefully. After comparing it with the authentic verses, he concluded that the new robbery was the work of an imitator rather than the original outlaw. Nevertheless, the incident raised questions that have never been fully resolved. Was the copycat simply seeking publicity? Or had Black Bart returned under circumstances that investigators failed to recognize? The theory persists because it highlights one of the greatest challenges in studying legendary criminals. Once a person becomes famous enough, others may attempt to imitate them. Separating genuine events from inspired copycats becomes increasingly difficult, especially when records are incomplete and witnesses are unreliable. Perhaps the most intriguing chapter in the Black Bart mystery involves his final known movements. After his release from prison, investigators continued monitoring him. According to later accounts, Wells Fargo detectives followed him to a hotel in Visalia, California. There, a man matching his description checked in and then vanished without explanation. What makes the story remarkable is what he allegedly left behind. A suitcase remained in the hotel room containing food, clothing accessories, and items bearing the same laundry mark that exposed his identity years earlier. To some researchers, this seems suspiciously convenient. Why would a man who had spent years avoiding capture suddenly abandon such recognizable evidence? Some conspiracy theorists believe that the abandoned luggage was intentional. They argue that Black Bart may have planted the items to create a false trail, allowing him to disappear permanently while investigators chased misleading clues. If true, it would represent one final act of deception by a man whose criminal career depended on illusion and misdirection. While many theories focus on dramatic escapes and secret identities, some historians favor a far simpler explanation. According to certain historical accounts, Black Bart may have eventually returned to New York, where he reportedly died around 1917. Although evidence connecting these reports to Charles Bowles remains incomplete, the theory offers a plausible explanation for his disappearance. This possibility lacks the excitement of hidden treasure or international escapes. There are no secret conspiracies, no mysterious disguises, and no final acts of criminal genius. Instead, it suggests that Black Bart simply spent his final years living quietly and anonymously before dying far from the places that made him famous. Ironically, this ordinary ending may be precisely why so many people reject it. Legends often demand dramatic conclusions. A quiet death in obscurity feels unsatisfying compared to the image of a master outlaw disappearing forever into history. Like many famous outlaws, Black Bart eventually became associated with stories of hidden treasure. Over the years, rumors spread throughout northern California and southern Oregon, claiming that portions of his stolen wealth were buried in secret locations. Treasure hunters have searched for evidence of these caches for generations. The theory gained popularity because Black Bart completed at least 28 known robberies, yet historians cannot account for every dollar he stole. This uncertainty created fertile ground for speculation. Some local legends even suggest that valuables from his final robbery were never recovered and remained hidden somewhere in the rugged wilderness where he once operated. Despite decades of searching, no verified Black Bart treasure has ever been discovered. Yet, these stories endure because they represent something larger than money. They symbolize the possibility that the outlaw left behind one final secret waiting to be uncovered.